Tzimtzum as a tool to finding God. Rabbi Reverend Dr. Michael H. Koplitz. Tzimtzum is a Kabbalistic concept that describes God's act of self contraction in order to make room for creation. In this understanding, God drew back to form a space in which the universe could come into being. Some rabbinic teachers explain that this was not an absolute absence of God, but rather a hiddenness, a sacred mystery in which God's presence remained, though not immediately seen. In that sense, creation begins in a space where divine power is veiled, not gone. Some even find a poetic parallel in modern science, just as physicists speak of traces of the universe's beginning, still echoing through creation. Faith may see in that mystery the lingering imprint of God's creative presence. We often speak of finding God, and many preachers urge us to open our hearts so that God may enter. But perhaps there is another way to understand that invitation. We may need to create an inner stillness, a holy space within the soul where God can be received. If we are made in God's image, then something of the divine already lives within us. Yet to truly experience God's nearness, we must quiet the noise inside us long enough to hear the voice that has been present all along. One way to think about this is to practice Tzimtzum within the ego itself. When the ego loosens its grip, it creates an opening, a space that God can fill with peace, wisdom, and grace. But when a person leaves no room beyond self-importance, self-protection, or constant inner striving, it becomes far more difficult to sense the presence of God. The smaller the ego becomes, the clearer the soul can hear. Christian language expresses a similar truth when it says, "Open your heart and let Christ come in." In the book of Revelation, Christ stands at the door and knocks. The image is deeply personal. God does not force entry, but waits to be welcomed. Tzimtzum offers another way of describing that same spiritual movement. Not merely opening a door, but making room within ourselves for the divine presence to dwell. When we practice Tzimtzum and create space for God within us, we participate in the ongoing work of creation. Kabbalistic thought teaches that creation is not only an event in the distant past, but a living process that continues even now. In its own way, science also points to a universe that is still expanding. For the believer, that expansion can become more than a physical fact. It can serve as a spiritual image of a God whose creative love is still unfolding, still making room for life, meaning, and communion. In that light, whenever we practice Tzimtzum, we reflect something of the divine pattern itself. We echo the movement by which God made room for the world, and in doing so, we become more deeply aware of our connection to God. Then the invitation becomes simple and profound. Ask God to enter that newly opened space and fill it with the Holy Spirit, with the radiant presence that Jewish tradition often calls the Shekinah, the indwelling glory of God. You may understand the idea and still wonder how to create that space within yourself. The answer begins with humility. Notice the places where ego, fear, resentment, or distraction crowd the soul, and then ask God to help you release them. Ask for the grace to become inwardly quiet, receptive, and open. Once that space begins to form, invite God to fill it with love, mercy, strength, and the presence of the Holy Spirit, the Shekinah who comforts, guides, and renews. This may sound simple, but it takes intention, surrender, and prayer. Prayer focuses the mind, softens the heart, and teaches the soul to listen. In prayer, we do not merely speak to God, we make room for God to speak within us. That is the practice of Tzimtzum in daily life, a willing emptying of self so that divine life can enter more fully. When we do this, we are not losing ourselves. We are becoming more fully what we were created to be, participants in God's ongoing creation, transformed from within by grace.